First time I saw the number, I thought I'd misread it. $41,000, gone from a savings account that was supposed to have nearly 60 in it. I was standing in our kitchen in Stony Creek at 6 in the morning with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand, and I remember laughing. Actually laughing. This small, disbelieving sound, because the only explanation that made sense was a bank error. People didn't just move 41 grand without telling their wife. Not the man I'd married. Not the man asleep upstairs who still texted me from the next room to ask if I wanted tea. I refreshed the page. The number didn't change. I should back up, because the money is where the story lands, but it isn't where it starts. It starts with my dad, and a will, and a house on a quiet street in a town 2 hours northeast of us that I grew up in and never thought I'd inherit so young. My dad died the spring I turned 29. Pancreatic, fast, the kind of fast where you go from "we're managing it" to a funeral home choosing urns in about 4 months. He was the only family I had left that counted. My mom passed when I was 19, and I'm an only child, so when he went, the world got very quiet in a way I'm not sure I have the words for even now. What he left me was the house I grew up in, free and clear, and a little over $90,000 he'd spent 40 years building one careful paycheck at a time. He drove a forklift at a distribution warehouse, he clipped flyers, he bought one good winter coat every decade and made it last. That 90,000 was not abstract to me. I could see his hands in it. I was married by then, 4 years. I'd met my husband at a friend's backyard wedding in Burlington, and I'd liked him immediately for the reasons you're supposed to like someone. Funny, warm, made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. He worked in commercial HVAC, did well enough, and for the first couple of years we were exactly the kind of couple you'd be a little annoyed by at a dinner party. We bought the place in Stony Creek together, split everything. He used to say we were a team, and I believed it, the way you believe things you've never had a reason to test. His family was a lot, and I knew that going in. His mother, my mother-in-law, was the sun the whole family orbited, and she liked it that way. Everything ran through her. Holidays at her house, opinions about everyone's choices, a way of asking questions that were actually instructions. His younger sister, my sister-in-law, was 31 and had never quite landed anywhere. A business that folded, a condo she couldn't keep, a boyfriend who came and went, and every time she fell, the family caught her, and the family meant, increasingly, money. I noticed this the way you notice weather. It was just the climate I'd married into. When my dad died, the climate changed. It was subtle at first. My mother-in-law started talking about the inheritance like it was a household event, a we. Now that you two have a bit of a cushion. That kind of thing. At a Sunday dinner about 2 months after the funeral, I remember the ham, I remember my sister-in-law not making eye contact. My mother-in-law floated the idea that the smart thing, the family thing, would be for me to put the money to work. She had a whole vision. My sister-in-law was going to open a little café in Dundas, a real one this time, a proper concept, and what she needed was seed capital, and wasn't it lovely that I happened to have exactly the right amount sitting there doing nothing? I said I wasn't ready to make any big decisions. My dad had been gone 8 weeks. My husband, sitting right next to me, said, "Of course, no pressure, take your time." And I felt grateful to him. I actually squeezed his knee under the table, because it felt like he was on my side. I want to be honest about something. I was grieving so hard that I was easy to manage and I didn't know it. When you're that hollowed out, you say yes to small things just to make a conversation end. And there were a lot of small things that sprang. My husband suggesting we keep the inheritance accessible instead of locked in a GIC in case the family needed flexibility. Him moving it, with my distracted okay, from the separate account my dad's estate lawyer had set up into our joint savings, just so it's not sitting in some account we forget about. I remember signing things at the kitchen table without reading them because reading them required a version of my brain that hadn't come back online yet. I trusted him to read for both of us. That was the whole arrangement of our marriage as I'd understood it. A team. Here's the thing I didn't know in the moment but understand now with a clarity that still makes my jaw tighten. Combining that money into the joint account wasn't bookkeeping. It was a move. In Ontario, an inheritance you receive during a marriage is yours. It's excluded from what gets divided if the marriage ends, as long as you keep it separate and you can trace it. The second it gets blended into joint money, the second you can't cleanly point to it anymore, that protection starts to dissolve. My husband knew this. I would find out later, from a search history I wasn't supposed to see, that he knew this in detail, that he'd read about it on a family law firm's blog 3 days before he suggested we simplify my accounts. He wasn't simplifying, he was untracing my dad's life so it could become the family's. So, the 41,000, 6 in the morning, cold coffee. I didn't wake him. That's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. They expect the screaming, the throwing of his bag onto the lawn, all of it. But I didn't do any of that, and not because I'm a saint, believe me. I didn't do it because some cold, clear part of me that I hadn't met before stepped forward and said, very quietly, if you let him know what you know, you lose the only advantage you have. I closed the laptop, I poured the coffee out, I made him his tea, and I brought it upstairs, and when he kissed me good morning and asked if I'd slept okay, I said not great, probably the dreams again, and he made a sympathetic face and rubbed my shoulder and told me to take it easy today. And I smiled and said I would. Then I went to work. I'm a dental hygienist. I had a full day of patients, and on my lunch break, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and started writing down everything I could remember about the last 4 months. Every conversation, every just sign here, every date I could pin down. I'd never done anything like that in my life. My hands were shaking, but the pen kept moving. That night, I told my husband I was going to my friend's place for a glass of wine, which was half true. My best friend, I'll call her Maeve because she'd kill me if I used her real name, is a paralegal. Has been for 15 years, and she's the kind of person who gets quieter and more focused the worse the news is. I told her everything in her kitchen while her kids watched a movie in the other room. I showed her the screenshot of the savings account. I told her about the account being merged, the accessible language, the café. She didn't say, oh my God, or he wouldn't, or any of the things friends say. She got a yellow legal pad. She asked me 3 questions. Did I still have the estate lawyer's original paperwork showing the inheritance came in clean and separate? Did I have any record of the date it got moved into joint? And was the house I grew up in, my dad's house, still in my name only? Yes, I thought so. Yes. Okay, she said. Then you're not as far gone as he thinks you are, but you cannot let him know you're looking. Not for 1 second. Men like this, the moment they feel you slipping out from under them, they accelerate. They'll move what's left. She tapped the pad. You build the whole picture first. Quietly. Then you move once, hard, with a lawyer behind you. Not a dozen little fights. 1 move. I drove home that night, and I'll tell you, the grief and the fear had been replaced by something that felt almost like sobriety. Like I'd been drunk for 4 months and the room had finally stopped spinning. He was watching hockey. He asked how Maeve was. I said she was good. The kids are getting so big. I sat down next to him and watched the 3rd period, and I felt, for the first time since my dad died, completely in control of my own life. He had no idea the woman beside him had just started taking it back. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life because on the surface, nothing changed at all, and underneath, everything did. I got into the online banking. We'd always shared logins. His trust in that direction had never wavered because why would it? And I went back 3 years, not just the inheritance, all of it. And what I found rearranged my understanding of my entire marriage. The 41,000 was the big, recent one. It had gone out in 2 transfers, 10 days apart, into an account I didn't recognize, which I later confirmed was my sister-in-law's. The café. They'd done it. They'd taken my dad's money for the café without telling me, and they'd done it the same week my mother-in-law had hugged me at Easter and told me what a generous spirit I had. But underneath the big one were dozens of small ones going back years, 500 here, 800 there, a couple of $2,000 ones, e-transfers to his mother, to his sister, labeled things like groceries and car. A pattern so steady it was basically a second mortgage we were paying, a mortgage on his family's comfort, drawn from money I'd assumed was ours, much of which, once I really dug, had quietly been mine. Money I'd earned. Money from a small RRSP my dad had helped me start when I was 22. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying that spring, all of it, for the wrong reasons. I screenshotted everything. I started a spreadsheet, date, amount, recipient, the cute little fake label he'd given each theft, and I backed it up to a drive that wasn't in the house and an email account he didn't know existed. Maeve had been very clear. Paper, paper, paper. The truth doesn't matter in a separation. Provable truth matters. And here's the part I'm not proud of and won't pretend I'm above. I started to enjoy it. Not the betrayal, the work. There's a particular feeling that comes from being underestimated by someone who thinks they've already won, and quietly assembling the thing that's going to end them and smiling at them across the dinner table the whole time. My mother-in-law thought I was a soft, grieving girl she'd successfully steered. My husband thought I was a wife who didn't read the fine print. And every single one of those assumptions was a brick I was using to build the wall I was going to put them behind. In April, about a year, almost to the week, after my dad died, my mother-in-law overplayed her hand, and it's the thing that turned my slow, quiet project into a fast one. We were at her place for Sunday dinner. My sister-in-law was glowing about the café, which was apparently going to open in the fall, and there were paint swatches and a logo on someone's phone, and I was making all the right noises. And then my mother-in-law, refilling the gravy, said it. She said the café had run a little over, the way these things do, and wasn't it lucky that there was still the property up north sitting empty. The property up north, my dad's house, my childhood home. Sitting empty in her telling, like a problem to be solved rather than the last physical place on earth my father had existed. She had a vision for that too. They'd sell it, put the proceeds into the cafe and a few other things the family's juggling. She said it the way she said everything, as though it were already decided and I was merely the last to be informed. And my husband, sitting next to me, nodded along and said, "It does make sense, babe. It's just sitting there. Babe." He called me babe while volunteering my father's house to be liquidated for his sister's espresso machine. I felt the whole table watching me, waiting for the soft yes. And I want you to understand that the cold, clear part of me had gotten very strong over those 2 months, strong enough to run the whole machine, and it ran it now. I felt my own face arrange itself into something thoughtful and a little sad. I said, "That's a big thought. Let me sit with it." I said it was hard to think about selling so soon. I let my voice catch a little, gave them the grief they expected to see, the soft girl they were managing. And inside, I had never been calmer in my life because she had just told me their next target and now I knew exactly how much time I had. The house. They were coming for the house, which meant I had to move before they could get me to sign anything, and the house, unlike the cash, was clean. It was in my name. It had never been merged into anything. It was the one thing my husband's clever little simplifications had never touched, because you can't quietly fold a property into a joint checking account. I went to a lawyer that week, not a friend of a friend, a family law lawyer in Hamilton named Miss Ferreira, recommended by Maeve, the kind who's seen this exact movie 100 times and is bored by the parts that still shocked me. I brought my binder. By then, it was a real binder. The estate paperwork showing the inheritance arriving clean and separate, the dated record of it being moved into joint, the spreadsheet of 3 years of transfers, the screenshots, the deed to my dad's house with my name and only my name on it. Miss Ferreira flicked through it for a long time without saying anything. Then she looked up and asked me one question that I've thought about 100 times since. "How long have you been keeping records?" 2 months, I said. She nodded slowly. "Most people come to me with feelings. You came with a file." She tapped the binder. This changes what we can do. She walked me through it. The house up north, clean, mine, never part of the matrimonial property, untouchable in a way the cash no longer fully was. The matrimonial home in Stony Creek. That was joint, that we'd split, and she was frank that I'd probably walk away with less than I felt I was owed there, because that's how the home works in Ontario, regardless of who's behaving badly. But the inheritance, the cash he'd carefully untraced, wasn't as lost as he thought. Because I had the paper. I had the estate lawyer's documents showing exactly what came in and when. I had the transfer that moved it into joint, dated 3 days after a search history I'd very legally photographed off our shared family iPad. Tracing isn't impossible just because someone tried to make it hard. It's only impossible if you can't prove the path. I could prove the path. My dad, who clipped flyers and made coats last a decade, had raised a daughter who kept receipts. And the 3 years of e-transfers to his mother and sister, those, Ms. Ferreira said, with the first hint of a smile I'd seen from her, were a very helpful pattern. We built the move. One move, like Maeve said. Not a fight at dinner. Not a screaming match. A separation, filed correctly, served correctly, with the house up north walled off from the start, a claim to trace the excluded inheritance, and a full accounting demand for the family transfers. Miss Ferreira would handle all of it. My only job, she said, was to keep living my life exactly as I had been until everything was ready. Don't tip him. Don't soften him up with a heart-to-heart. People always want the conversation. The conversation is a gift you give yourself and a warning you give them. Skip it. So I skipped it. For 3 more weeks, I made tea and watched hockey and made the right noises about paint swatches, and it was the strangest performance of my life, and I was, God help me, good at it. The day we served him, I wasn't home. That was deliberate. I was at work, mid-cleaning, gloved hands in some poor man's mouth, when it happened, because Miss Paredes Ferreira had been very clear that I should be nowhere near the moment, that there should be no scene I was a part of, nothing he could ever later characterize as me being unstable or cruel. The documents went to him cleanly, professionally, through the proper channel. By the time I finished my shift, there were 11 missed calls and a string of texts that went from confused to wounded to furious to, and this is the one I saved. We're a team. What are you doing? Call me. We can fix this. A team. He used that word, the word that had been the whole architecture of my trust. After he'd spent 3 years quietly billing me for his family's life and had just tried to sell my dead father's house out from under me. I didn't call him. I drove to Maeve's. I'd already moved a suitcase there days before, slowly, a few things at a time, like I was emptying a sandbag so that when the day came, I didn't have to do anything dramatic. That's the secret nobody tells you about leaving well. You do it boring. You do it in increments. You make the explosion. When it finally comes, land on a house you've already quietly walked out of. I'm not going to pretend the next few months were tidy. They weren't. His family came at me the way that kind of family does. First, the love bombing, my mother-in-law calling to tell me I was like a daughter and that this was all a misunderstanding we could solve as a family, not with lawyers. Then, when that didn't move me, the other face. The texts about how I'd torn the family apart, how I was punishing them over money, how my dad would be ashamed. That last one was meant to be the kill shot. It's the one they always save for last. The dead parent, the shame. I read it standing in Maeve's driveway and I waited for it to hurt and it just didn't. Because I knew my dad and I knew exactly what my dad would have thought of people who eyed his house at a dinner table before his daughter's first year of grief was even up. He'd have thought what I thought. He'd have kept receipts too. The case itself was almost anticlimactic, which Miss Ferreira told me is what winning usually looks like when the other side realizes you have paper. Real, dated, traceable paper, and a 3-year pattern of transfers labeled groceries that were actually their own greed in plain sight. They stop fighting the war and start trying to lose the smallest possible version of it. His lawyer's tune changed fast once the accounting demand landed and they understood that every dollar that had gone to his mother and sister was now something they'd have to explain. You can't unsend an e-transfer. You can't relabel it after the fact. The bank record says what it says. The house up north stayed mine, completely, exactly as my dad left it. It was never even seriously contested in the end because there was nothing to contest. It had never been theirs to imagine selling, and the only thing their dinner table scheming had accomplished was telling me in advance which door to bolt first. The inheritance, the 41,000 and the rest of the cash he'd so cleverly simplified, I got the bulk of it back, traced through the very paper trail he'd assumed his merging trick had destroyed. Not all of it. Some was genuinely gone, sunk into a café I'll never set foot in. But the principle held, the law lets you protect what you can prove is yours. And I could prove it, and the thing he'd been counting on, my grief, my trust, my not reading the fine print, turned out to be the one thing about me that had quietly changed the morning I saw that number and didn't wake him up. The matrimonial home, the Stony Creek place, we sold. Split the equity. That part was the law being the law, and I made my peace with it because I was never fighting for that house. I was fighting for my father's. The cafe opened that fall and closed by the following spring. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. I heard about it the way you hear about weather in a town you used to live in. Here's what I actually want to leave you with, though, because the money is satisfying, but the money isn't the point. The point is the morning. The point is that I had every reason, that morning with the cold coffee, to do the thing that felt natural, to march upstairs and confront the man I loved and demand an explanation, to have the conversation, to give him the chance to look me in the eye and lie, and to give myself the brief, expensive satisfaction of being right out loud. And some part of me I'd never met before knew that the satisfaction of being right out loud is the most expensive thing you can buy. It costs you everything you'd need to actually win. So I made his tea instead. And I built a file. And I let a man who thought I was soft keep thinking it for exactly as long as it took. I live in my dad's house now, the empty property up north that was just sitting there. I sold the Stony Creek place and I moved into the home I grew up in, and I had the kitchen redone with my share of the equity, and the new cupboards are the exact pale green my mom would have picked. I kept Dad's forklift safety award on the wall in the hallway, the cheap little plaque, because it makes me laugh and it makes me cry, and both of those are better than what I felt that whole hollow spring. People in the comments are always going to ask whether I regret not screaming at him, not throwing his stuff on the lawn, not getting the cinematic version. I don't. The cinematic version is for people who want to feel something. I wanted to win something. There's a difference, and learning at the spring my father died is the most useful thing I own, more useful even than the house. He still texts, sometimes. Birthdays, the anniversary of my dad's death, which he learned too late, was a date I noticed people remembering. The last one just said, "I hope you're okay." I read it at my own kitchen table, in the pale green kitchen, in the house nobody got to sell, and I didn't feel angry and I didn't feel sad. I felt like the woman who poured the coffee out and made the tea and got everything that was actually hers, every dollar she could trace, and the one thing she'd have burned it all down to keep. I put the phone face down. I finished my coffee while it was still hot, the way you can when no one's drinking yours behind your back. And then I went out to the garage, where my dad's old tools still hang exactly where he left them, and I got back to work on the porch he never quite finished, in the house that was always, all along, going to be mine. The morning I saw that number drained out of our savings, the easiest thing in the world would have been to walk upstairs and scream. Every part of me that was still raw from burying my dad wanted the confrontation, wanted to watch his face, wanted to be right out loud. And the thing I've come to understand is that wanting to be right out loud is exactly how you lose. The satisfaction of the scene is the price of the win, and I couldn't afford both. So I poured the coffee out and made the tea instead, and that one quiet choice is the hinge the whole rest of my life turned on. Nothing that came after, the binder, the traced inheritance, my dad's house staying mine, happened because I got lucky. It happened because of a chain I built one careful link at a time. I kept my mouth shut, so we never accelerated. I wrote down dates while my hands shook, so later I had paper instead of feelings. I called Maeve instead of a divorce hotline, so I got a paralegal's discipline instead of a friend's outrage. I walked into Miss Ferreira's office with a file so she could do something real instead of just sympathizing. Cause and effect. Boring. Unglamorous cause and effect. I think there were 3 things that morning asked of me, and I didn't have any of them fully until I needed them. The first was a kind of steadiness about right and wrong that didn't bend just because the people pressuring me called it family. My mother-in-law was very good at making greed sound like generosity, and the only thing that held was my own clear sense that my father's life savings were not a café fund. The second was the patience to think instead of react, to see that the loud version of justice would have handed them a warning, and the slow version would hand me everything. That's not cleverness for its own sake. It's just refusing to mistake a feeling for a plan. And the third was the plain endurance to keep performing normal at dinner for 3 more weeks while the explosion got built somewhere he couldn't see it. That part nearly broke me, the smiling at paint swatches. But you can't outlast people who are counting on your collapse unless you're willing to be quietly, stubbornly unbroken for longer than they expect. I live in my dad's house now, the one that was just sitting there. The cafe closed by spring. He still texts on the anniversary of my dad's death, and I read those texts in my pale green kitchen and feel almost nothing, which is its own kind of peace. If you're standing in your own cold coffee morning right now, hear me, don't have the conversation, build the file. Keep your sense of what's actually yours, keep your head, and keep going one boring link at a time. That's how soft, grieving girls quietly win everything.